The diner was alive with the hum of voices, clinking utensils, and the sizzling sounds of burgers grilling in the open kitchen. It was a cozy establishment just off the interstate, a familiar spot for weary travelers, truck drivers, and the occasional biker gang looking for a quick meal. The decor was vintage Americana, complete with red leather booths, a jukebox in the corner, and black and white photos of the diner's history adorning the walls. The scent of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was both inviting and nostalgic. Behind the counter was Maya, a young black woman in her late 20s. Maya was a hardworking waitress who had become the heart of the diner over the 3 years she had worked there. She had an infectious smile and a natural warmth that made her a favorite among regulars. But today, her smile was tested. It had been a long shift, and the crowd seemed rowdier than usual. The truckers were chatty but polite, and families traveling with kids were focused on keeping their little ones occupied. The exception was a group of bikers who had entered about 15 minutes ago. Their entrance was as loud as their appearance. Leather jackets, heavy boots, and booming laughter that echoed through the diner. Most of the other patrons avoided eye contact, sensing trouble. Maya had seen customers like them before. She wasn't intimidated by their tough exteriors or their loud voices. She'd served bikers plenty of times, but something about the leader of this group set her on edge. He was tall, muscular, and had an air of arrogance about him. His voice was deep and gruff, and his laugh was more of a bark that demanded attention. He called her over with a snap of his fingers, a gesture she had always found disrespectful. "Hey, sweetheart," the biker called, grinning as she approached the table. "What's a pretty girl like you doing working in a dump like this?" Maya forced a smile, her professionalism intact. "What can I get you gentlemen?" she asked, ignoring the comment. The group of 4 bikers scanned the menu, making loud, crude jokes among themselves. One of them muttered something under his breath, and the others erupted into laughter. Maya didn't catch the words, but she felt the sting of their tone. The leader leaned back in his chair, tossing the menu onto the table. "We'll take a round of coffees and a stack of pancakes each. And make it quick, sweetheart. We've got places to be." Maya nodded, jotting down the order. "Coming right up," she said, turning to leave. As she walked back to the counter, she could feel their eyes on her, and not in a kind way. She shrugged it off. She had learned long ago not to let customers' attitudes get to her. But the tension in the air was palpable, and she couldn't help but glance toward the far corner of the diner, where a lone customer sat quietly. The man was dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, his baseball cap pulled low over his face. He blended into the background, but Maya noticed he had been watching the bikers since they arrived. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. He had an imposing build, broad shoulders, and an air of calm confidence. For now, he simply observed, sipping his coffee as if he were waiting for the right moment to step in. Back at the counter, Maya prepared the coffees and passed the order to the cook. She glanced at the clock and sighed, willing the shift to go faster. The bikers, however, seemed intent on dragging it out. "Hey, sweetheart," the leader called again, louder this time. Maya grabbed the coffee pot and headed to their table. "Yes?" she asked, setting the cups down in front of them. The man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "You're a little slow, aren't you? I said quick service, not whatever this is," he said, gesturing to the coffee as if it were an insult. Maya's smile tightened, but she kept her tone polite. "Is there something wrong with the coffee?" "No, but you could have brought it faster," he sneered. His friends laughed, egging him on. "Maybe you're just not cut out for this kind of work. Huh? Bet you'd be better off sticking to what you're good at. You know, like standing around looking pretty." A few nearby customers shifted uncomfortably, clearly hearing the exchange but unsure of how to react. Maya felt her cheeks flush, but she refused to let him see her falter. "I'll get your pancakes," she said evenly, turning away from the table. As she walked back to the counter, the man muttered something under his breath, and the group erupted into laughter again. Maya clenched her fists, fighting the urge to react. She had dealt with rude customers before, but the outright disrespect was harder to ignore. The man in the corner, the one in the hoodie, set down his coffee cup. His eyes followed Maya as she worked, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be waiting for something, though no one else in the diner appeared to notice him. Maya returned to the table with the pancakes, setting the plates down carefully. The leader of the group smirked at her. "Now that's more like it," he said, picking up his fork. But instead of eating, he deliberately knocked his coffee cup over, spilling the contents across the table. "Oops," he said mockingly. "Looks like someone's got a mess to clean up." Maya froze, her breath catching in her throat. The other customers watched in silence, their discomfort evident. The man in the hoodie straightened in his seat, his jaw tightening. Maya grabbed a rag and began cleaning up the spilled coffee, her movements tense. The biker leaned closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Good girl," he said, patting her on the shoulder as if she were a child. That was the moment when the man in the hoodie stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the table, his presence commanding attention. The room seemed to hold its breath as he stopped just behind the leader of the bikers. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The biker turned, looking up at the man towering over him. "Who the hell are you?" he sneered. The man smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies," he said. Maya looked up, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. For the first time since the bikers had arrived, she felt a glimmer of hope. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. The diner fell into an uneasy silence as the man in the hoodie stood tall behind the biker leader, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the tension crackling in the air. The other customers froze mid-bite, their gazes shifting between the two men. Even Maya hesitated, the rag in her hand trembling slightly as she paused in the middle of cleaning the spilled coffee. The biker leader, whose name was Vince, turned in his seat to size up the stranger who dared to interfere. Vince was used to intimidating people. It was a skill he had honed over years of barking orders and flexing his physical presence. But this man didn't flinch. His calmness only made Vince angrier. "You think you can just walk up here and play the hero?" Vince growled, standing to his full height. He was tall, but the man in the hoodie had an inch or two on him. "Mind your own business, buddy." The stranger didn't back down. "Respecting the people who serve your food isn't just my business. It's everyone's," he said, his voice even and controlled. The other bikers shifted in their seats, clearly readying themselves for a fight if it came to that. Vince laughed, a sharp, barking sound meant to cover his own discomfort. "Big words for someone who doesn't know who he's messing with," he said. The man's lips twitched in the barest hint of a smile. "Funny, I was about to say the same to you." Maya, sensing the tension was about to escalate, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, please, it's okay. I'll handle it," she said, her voice soft but urgent. Vince seized on her words, his grin widening. "Yeah, listen to her. She knows her place. Go back to your corner, hero, before you bite off more than you can chew." The man didn't move. He glanced at Maya, offering her a nod of reassurance, and then returned his steady gaze to Vince. "Apologize," he said simply. Vince's laughter boomed through the diner. "Apologize? To her? For what?" he said, pointing at Maya as if she were a punchline to some cruel joke. "For disrespecting her," the man said. His tone wasn't threatening, but there was a quiet authority in it that made even Vince falter for a moment. But Vince recovered quickly, his arrogance fueling his next move. "You've got some nerve," he said, leaning forward aggressively. Then, with a smirk, he turned his attention back to Maya. "You know what, sweetheart? How about you fetch me another coffee instead? Maybe you'll get it right this time." Maya's face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. Before she could respond, Vince upped the ante. He grabbed a fork from the table and clanged it against his glass, creating an obnoxious ringing sound. "Hey everyone!" he shouted, drawing the attention of every diner. "Let's give a round of applause for the hardest-working waitress in the state." His friends erupted into laughter, clapping mockingly and whistling as Maya stood frozen in place, her knuckles white around the rag she held. A few patrons looked away, too uncomfortable to intervene, while others exchanged worried glances. "That's enough," the man in the hoodie said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Vince's laughter died in his throat as he turned back to the stranger. "Or what?" he sneered. "You gonna do something about it?" The man took a step closer, his calm demeanor unchanged. "If you don't apologize, you'll regret it," he said simply. For a moment, the air was thick with anticipation. Then Vince shoved the man's shoulder, trying to provoke him. "Let's see what you've got, tough guy." The man didn't react to the shove, but the tension in the room grew even thicker. Maya, fearing the situation was about to spiral out of control, stepped between them. "Please stop," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not worth it." Vince sneered at her. "See, even she knows when to back down. Maybe you should take a page out of her book." The man's expression darkened for the first time, his jaw tightening. "Last chance," he said, his voice low. Vince scoffed and turned back to his friends. "This guy's got a death wish," he said, laughing as he picked up his fork and stabbed it into his stack of pancakes. "Let's eat. I'm done wasting time on." He didn't get to finish his sentence. Before Vince could take another bite, the man in the hoodie leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Whatever he said made Vince's face pale instantly. His fork clattered to his plate as he froze in place, his bravado evaporating in an instant. The other bikers stared at their leader in confusion. "What's wrong, Vince?" one of them asked, but Vince didn't respond. The man straightened, adjusting his hoodie. "Enjoy your meal," he said, his voice calm once more. Then he turned to Maya, giving her a small nod before returning to his seat in the corner. The entire diner watched in stunned silence as Vince slowly sat back down, his hands trembling. He avoided eye contact with anyone, especially the man in the hoodie. His friends tried to ask him what was going on, but he waved them off, his appetite gone. Maya was still trying to process what had just happened when one of the truckers spoke up. "Who is that guy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man in the hoodie didn't answer. He simply resumed sipping his coffee, as if nothing had happened. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. And judging by Vince's reaction, she wasn't the only one who thought so. The rest of the diner resumed their meals, though the atmosphere remained tense. The bikers ate quickly, their earlier arrogance replaced with a quiet unease. Vince kept his head down, his bravado shattered. Maya returned to the counter, her mind racing. Who was this man, and what had he said to Vince to make him back down so completely? She didn't have time to dwell on it. The diner was still busy, and there were orders to take. But as she worked, she couldn't help but steal glances at the man in the hoodie, her curiosity growing with each passing moment. Little did she know, the truth about him would soon come to light, and it would leave everyone in the diner speechless. The quiet tension in the diner lingered long after the earlier confrontation between Vince and the mysterious man in the hoodie. Maya busied herself at the counter, trying to focus on her tasks, but her hands still trembled. Despite her years of working at the diner and dealing with rude customers, nothing had shaken her quite like Vince's mocking tirade. As the minutes ticked by, Maya noticed the man in the hoodie watching the bikers from his corner seat. His demeanor remained calm, almost meditative, but there was a palpable authority about him. Maya couldn't help but wonder why Vince, who had clearly thrived on intimidating others, had become so subdued after just a few whispered words. The bikers, for their part, were unusually quiet. Vince had barely touched his food and seemed lost in thought, avoiding eye contact with everyone. His friends muttered among themselves, their confusion growing by the second. Then, just when it seemed the tension had begun to dissipate, the door to the diner swung open again. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp black jacket stepped inside, instantly drawing the attention of everyone in the room. It was Cena. Maya's jaw nearly dropped. She recognized him immediately. His signature build, chiseled features, and unmistakable presence were hard to miss. But what was he doing here in a modest roadside diner? Cena surveyed the room briefly, his sharp gaze taking in the bikers, the man in the hoodie, and Maya behind the counter. His expression remained unreadable as he approached the counter, placing a hand on it lightly. "Hi there," he said, his voice warm and polite. "Could I get a cup of coffee?" Maya blinked, momentarily speechless. She quickly regained her composure, nodding as she poured him a fresh cup. "Of course, Mr. Cena," she said, her voice shaking slightly. He smiled. "Please, just John." As Maya handed him the coffee, the other customers began whispering excitedly among themselves. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly recognizing Cena but unsure of how to react. Vince, in particular, seemed to sink lower in his seat, his earlier bravado completely gone. Cena took his coffee and turned toward the man in the hoodie. To Maya's surprise, the two men exchanged a knowing look, as if they were familiar with each other. Cena walked over and sat across from him, setting his coffee down with deliberate calmness. For a few moments, they spoke in low voices, their conversation inaudible to the rest of the diner. Maya watched from the counter, her curiosity piqued. What connection could these two possibly have? Finally, Cena stood, his expression serious. He turned to the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the soft hum of the diner. "I'd like to address something." All eyes were on him. Cena's gaze settled on the bikers, his expression firm but not unkind. "Respect is something we all deserve, no matter who we are or where we come from," he began. "And today, I witnessed behavior that doesn't align with that principle." The bikers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Vince looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Cena continued, his tone even but resolute. "I understand that sometimes people act out of ignorance or frustration, but mocking someone for doing their job, especially when they're working hard to serve you, that's not okay." Maya felt her throat tighten as tears welled in her eyes. For so long, she had endured mistreatment from customers, always swallowing her pride and keeping her head down. Hearing someone as influential as John Cena stand up for her was overwhelming. Vince finally broke his silence, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, avoiding Cena's gaze. Cena tilted his head slightly, his expression softening just a fraction. "Then maybe it's time to make things right," he said. Vince hesitated, his pride warring with his fear. But under Cena's steady gaze, he slowly stood up. He turned to Maya, his face flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have said those things." Maya blinked, caught off guard by the apology. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Finally, she managed a small nod. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cena nodded approvingly. "Apologizing is a good start," he said. "But respect isn't just about words. It's about actions. Let's all try to do better moving forward." The room was silent, the weight of Cena's words sinking in. The bikers quickly finished their meals and left the diner, their usual bravado replaced with subdued humility. Vince lingered for a moment, casting one last glance at Cena before following his friends out the door. As the door swung shut behind them, the diner seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Cena turned back to Maya, his expression softening. "You handled that situation with a lot of grace," he said. "Not everyone would have stayed as composed as you did." Maya blushed, a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment washing over her. "Thank you," she said. "I'm just not used to people standing up for me like that." "Well," Cena said with a small smile, "you deserved it. People like you keep the world running, and you should never be made to feel less than anyone else." The man in the hoodie approached then, his hands tucked into his pockets. Maya noticed for the first time that his demeanor had softened as well. "You were great out there," he said to Cena, his voice low but sincere. Cena clapped him on the shoulder, a warm camaraderie evident between them. "It was a team effort," he said. Maya watched them leave together, their bond raising even more questions in her mind. Who was the man in the hoodie, and what role had he played in the events of the day? As she cleared the empty plates and wiped down the tables, she realized that, for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen. The events of the day had been challenging, but they had also reminded her of something important. No matter how small or insignificant she might feel, there were still people in the world who valued kindness, respect, and justice. And for that, she was deeply grateful. The diner felt quieter now, as if the tension from earlier had evaporated entirely. Maya watched through the window as Vince and his biker crew rode away, their roaring engines muffled by the glass. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of relief. Still, she was processing the surreal events that had just unfolded. John Cena, one of the most recognizable figures in the world, had stood up for her, a simple waitress in a roadside diner. Felt like a scene from a movie, yet it was her reality. John remained seated for a while, quietly sipping his coffee as Maya tidied the counter. She stole glances at him, still slightly starstruck. It wasn't every day that someone like him walked into her world. The other diners had mostly cleared out, leaving the place much quieter. The man in the hoodie, whom Maya now suspected was more than just a random patron, sat at a nearby table, casually scrolling on his phone. Finally, John approached the counter again, his towering frame seeming less intimidating now. He placed a few bills on the counter, more than enough to cover his coffee, and offered Maya a warm smile. "Thank you for the coffee, and for staying strong back there," he said. Maya hesitated, then mustered her courage. "Thank you for stepping in. You didn't have to, but it meant a lot." John nodded, his expression sincere. "It's what anyone should do. People like Vince thrive on making others feel small. Standing up to them reminds them, and everyone else, that respect is non-negotiable." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes again but blinked them away. "You really have no idea how much that meant to me." Before John could respond, the man in the hoodie stood and approached. Up close, Maya could see he had a sharp, intelligent gaze. He wasn't intimidating, but there was something about him that suggested he was no ordinary diner customer. "Maya," he said, his voice calm, "I know you've been through a lot today, but I want to make sure you leave this shift with more than just an apology." Maya tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" The man exchanged a look with John, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. Maya hesitated before picking it up. Her eyes widened as she read the name and title printed on it. Daniel Carter, Regional Director, Cena Enterprises. Maya looked up at him, her mouth slightly agape. "You work for him?" she asked, glancing between Daniel and John. "Not just work for him," Daniel said with a grin. "We're partners in a lot of things. And one of those things is recognizing hardworking people who deserve better." John leaned on the counter, his voice kind but serious. "Maya, I've seen enough to know that you're one of those people. You stayed composed under pressure, you didn't stoop to their level, and you kept serving with dignity. That's not something we take lightly." Maya felt her heart pounding in her chest. I don't understand. What does this mean?" Daniel smiled. "It means that if you're willing, we'd like to offer you a position. Something better than this diner, where your efforts will be truly appreciated." Maya's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you serious?" she whispered. "Completely," John said. "And before you start worrying about qualifications or experience, don't. We'll make sure you have all the training and support you need." For a moment, Maya was too overwhelmed to speak. She had spent years working long hours in thankless jobs, enduring mistreatment from customers and struggling to make ends meet. The idea that someone as influential as John Cena was offering her a chance at something better felt like a dream. Finally, she found her voice. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't feel like enough." John smiled warmly. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. And when you're ready, give Daniel a call." Maya nodded, clutching the business card as if it were a lifeline. "I will. I promise." Daniel patted her shoulder lightly. "Good. And remember, this isn't charity. It's recognition of your worth. As the two men prepared to leave, Maya couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. She watched them step outside, where a sleek black SUV waited. John paused before getting in, turning back to give her a small wave. Maya waved back, her heart full. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Though she still had customers to serve and tables to clean, everything felt different. The weight she had been carrying for so long seemed lighter now. For the first time in years, she felt seen, valued. When her shift finally ended, Maya walked home with a spring in her step. The city lights seemed brighter, the air fresher. Clutching Daniel's card tightly in her hand, she allowed herself to dream about what her future might hold. She imagined a job where she was respected, where her hard work paid off, and where she could finally leave the grind of diner life behind. The next morning, after much thought and a few nervous breaths, Maya picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. Daniel answered almost immediately, his tone friendly and reassuring. They arranged a meeting for the following week, where he promised to explain everything in detail. Over the next few months, Maya's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. With the support and mentorship of Daniel and John, she took on a new role within Cena Enterprises. The work was challenging, but Maya thrived. For the first time, she felt like she was building a future for herself, one she could be proud of. Word eventually spread about the incident at the diner. Vince and his crew were banned from several establishments after similar behavior was exposed. Meanwhile, Maya became something of a local hero, her story inspiring others to stand up for themselves and never settle for less than they deserved. One evening, months after the fateful day at the diner, Maya received a call from John Cena himself. He invited her to a charity event, where he planned to share her story as an example of resilience and the power of kindness. Maya accepted, feeling both honored and humbled. Standing on the stage that night, with John by her side, Maya realized just how far she had come. From a waitress struggling to make ends meet to a respected professional with a bright future, she had proven that with the right opportunities and the courage to seize them, anything was possible. As she looked out at the crowd, Maya felt a deep sense of gratitude. To John, to Daniel, and even to herself for never giving up. The applause that followed her speech was thunderous, but all she could hear was the beating of her own heart, full of hope and determination.